Welcome back to Seamwork Radio, where we share practical ideas for building a creative process so you can sew with intention and joy. Today, we have something extra special to share with you. In the last episode, we shared part one of a special live episode of Seamwork Radio recorded at Stitchfest. If you haven't listened to that one yet, go back and grab episode 171. And just to refresh you, back in October, we hosted an event called Stitchfest, and nearly 100 people gathered at Seamwork HQ, and we shared an afternoon together, recording a live podcast of Seamwork Radio. We hosted a patternmakers panel, we had a sample sale, we had a social hour, and we had crafts, and it was a total blast. Haley actually ended up getting sick, so we brought in our lead pattern maker, Robin, for a great discussion on the most common sewing questions we hear. Enjoy part 2 today, and be sure to tune in next week for our panel discussion with 6 different pattern makers.
Hello, this is Carrie, and my question is, how do I know if a pattern is too advanced for my skills?
That's a great question, and that's definitely one we've been asked a lot. So there was an episode of the podcast a while back where we touched on this, and we talked about the difference between ambitious sewers and cautious sewers. And I think it really helps to know where you fall on that continuum. If you're a more ambitious sewer, what do you, Robin? Would you say you're more ambitious or you're more cautious when it comes to sewing?
Oh, probably more ambitious.
Yeah, even with all that math?
Especially with all that math.
I would say I'm more ambitious too. I feel like I always just want to dive into things and try it out myself. And I think the danger, if you fall on that side of the continuum, is that you can get really frustrated when it doesn't come out the way you wanted. And it often doesn't because you're just plowing ahead. And I think that's a downside of being an ambitious sewer. On the other side of the spectrum, if you're more cautious, the downside is learning doesn't happen as fast because you're taking your time and you're trying things out in a more slow and methodical way, which is great, but you don't learn quite as fast. So I don't think one is better than the other. I think they're just different approaches, and you might feel differently at different times as well, or about different projects.
I'm a more cautious knitter.
Yeah. Are you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I haven't tried cable yet, and it's been years and years.
I'm an ambitious knitter for sure. So I think that's one thing, is just kind of know where your personality lies, and that can really help you to determine how ambitious you want to get with your projects, and how much disappointment you can tolerate. I feel like I can tolerate quite a bit, but some people maybe don't feel that way. So I think that's one thing. Another kind of tip on a more practical level that I would say is to look at your pattern and think about what new skills you're going to be mastering with this pattern. Is it going to be a whole host of things that you've never done before, or is it really just 1 or 2 skills that you need to build in order to do this? And if it's really just 1 or 2 things, even if they're hard, then I think that's a great place to start with a more ambitious project. If it's really going to be like you have to learn how to do 5 things and you're going to want to have them done all perfectly in order to make the vision in your head come to life, then it might be a good idea to slow it down and maybe do kind of an intermediate project where you can practice some of those skills before you get to this big vision. So that's another thing. So just kind of look at what skills are required, see if it's more than 1 or 2 new skills, and start there. And then another thing that we talk about in our Learn to Sew class that we have is practicing, just doing little practice samples of things. I think this is a technique that's really underutilized, especially when you become a little bit more intermediate or a little bit more advanced and you don't feel like the need to slow yourself down by doing this. But if you're doing something new for the first time, just grabbing some scrap fabric and trying it out before you put it into your final garment is going to save you a lot of headache down the road. If you can practice it, not only are you going to have more confidence doing it, but it's probably going to come out better the second or the third time than it did the first time. So those are my tips.
We've talked about releasing like a little practice kit for welt pockets, I mean, even when we do them in the office, we practice a few times before we do them on the samples. Yeah, there are things that are hard, even for advanced sewists, that you just have to make those mock-ups and practice it a few times.
Yeah, and welt pockets, that's a great example. They just require so much precision. Mm-hmm. You have to get them exactly right. And if you've done welt pockets before, but you haven't done them in a few years, then it's kind of like starting all over again.
Oh yeah, a double welt pocket is even worse.
Yeah.
I told Haley she's not allowed to put it on anything. I don't want to do it.
But they look so good.
They do if you do them right. Haley always defies me anyway, so she probably will. Are you listening, Haley?
She's here in spirit. She hears every word you say.
My mic is possessed. Okay, so we are on to our 6th question.
Hi, I'm Laurel. My question is, I want to reduce waste while sewing. Is projector sewing worth it?
Oh, yes. Projector sewing is so awesome. It's really, honestly, I think it's the most exciting sewing invention since indie pattern companies, really. Maybe YouTube sew-alongs. The keys here are, like, do you have the space for it? And are you willing to do the research for it? Because it is a rabbit hole of research. And the best place to start is the Projectors for Sewing group in Facebook. And I see a lot of heads nodding. We get this question on the community a lot, and that's where everyone directs them first. These amazing moderators have done all the exhaustive research for us. And then the crowdsourcing of everyone in the community, they have files on which companies have projector sewing patterns, which projector to get, which mount to get, how to measure for it, what tables, all these amazing, amazing things. It really is a rabbit hole, but it's the most fun rabbit hole.
Robin's very passionate about projectors.
I am. I discovered it, I think it was a few years ago, right? Maybe a few months after they started the group, and I remember talking to you about it, feeling like the biggest nerd in the world, because I'm like, this is what they're doing. It's just so inventive. I cannot give those ladies enough credit. And you interviewed one for a podcast, right?
Yeah, we interviewed Fuyo for a podcast.
Oh, yes. Just really, really amazing. They even have, so as you know, not all indie companies have projector patterns, and I'm sure the Big Four doesn't, right? Do they? I don't think so. So the companies that have print at home patterns, there's a program where you can stitch those pages together, and this Projector for Sewing group will tell you exactly how to do it, how to what the other app you need to make alterations in it. So that's often a common question, like what if I need to make a lot of alterations? And they do it. People do it in the projector sewing, and it's amazing. We've been making these files for a couple of years now. I think we have back through like 2020 and some random ones before that. And this file was so much fun to make a template of. I'm like, okay, here are my calibration grids. I even made a black layer in case you have like a really printed fabric, so that you can see all the colors. It's just every time I make a projector file every month, I look at it with the black layer on there and all the colors, and I'm like, oh, it's so beautiful.
It is a really great way to reduce waste and to save time in the sewing room if you can get it all set up for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you don't have to, print out the pattern. If you're printing at home, then you don't have to tile it. If you're going to a copy shop, you don't have to deal with that whole process.
No cutting. Yeah, it saves so much time. I see comments in the Projectors for Sewing group all the time where they're like, yeah, I cut and made 4 things in 2 hours. And I'm like, wow, I don't think I could do that. That's amazing. And it's really just like the Seamwork community, the Projector for Sewing community, they are so incredibly supportive.
Yeah.
It's just a really fun place to be. It makes you feel really good in there.
Well, they're nerding out. Like
they're nerding out. Gosh, I love pattern nerds.
What do you think are some of the downsides of projectors, though?
Let's see. Well, if you're sort of piecemealing it, jerry-rigging it together, if your projector's not mounted somewhere and set up all the time, it can be a kind of a pain too. Like, I don't have the space at home, so I was using it on a tripod and doing it on the floor, and that's not the best way to do it.
Yeah.
It really made it feel like a hindrance to me. Another downside would be if there's something that you make a lot of, maybe it's a t-shirt or donut exercise shorts, it might actually be easier to have that paper pattern. But there's a lot of projector sewers who will project it onto like a tissue of some sort and make their, and then just keep that. But that way they avoid all the copy shop stuff as well as too.
Yeah, I could see the space probably being the biggest constraint
Yes.
for people. I can imagine. And the math.
It's surprisingly easy, the math. With the calibration grids, they're meant to match the cutting mats. The key there is not all cutting mats are accurate. So watch out for that.
Wow, that's an anxiety I hadn't considered before.
Yeah. But you know what? This is another place where close enough is. And just to be clear, I don't do good enough in patterns. I'm a perfectionist in patterns. But in my own sewing, the little pucker is good enough. But the calibration mats, as you get further out, it's more like, when you're centered right there in the center, it's easiest to get it matching completely. If it's a 16th or even an 1/8 of an inch off on the far out, it's not as important because you're going to be moving those pattern pieces to the center anyway, mostly, I think. And even if you did cut one where it was a 16th out, it's not adding that much to your pattern. Because you could, even if you're doing a paper pattern, you could cut an 1/8 inch outside of the line, or like I cut through my lines by accident all the time.
Yeah, it happens.
It happens. It's not that. That's a place where, okay, don't worry about the math as much. You can lose a little bit, yeah. Okay, so our 7th question.
Hi, I'm Michelle, and I'm really struggling with fitting clothes to my body. Where do I even start?
I think there are a lot of different approaches to fitting out there. And I think that's a big source of confusion, frustration for people, is just there's so much information out there, and it's really, really hard to know what to pay attention to and what not to. So one of the things that I think this advice came from Haley, but I fully endorse it, which is just pick a resource that works for you and that makes sense to you and just stick with that at first. So if it's a methodology that makes sense and you can at least work with it for a little while, just try that for a while. So whether that's tissue fitting or whether that's, a certain class or a certain book, start there and try to apply those principles to your fitting for a while and see how far that takes you, rather than, just Googling things and looking at various tutorials or YouTube videos and trying to kind of piece it all together. So there are some great resources out there. There's a lot of great fitting books. If you're into tissue fitting, Fit for Real People, the Palmer Pletch series are great for that. And that's their whole approach, which is taking the pattern, actually putting it on your body and fitting the pattern itself to your body. So that's one approach. We have a How to Fit with Confidence class that Haley teaches. If you're a Seamwork member, you can get that for free. So that's a great place to start with just learning kind of the principles of fitting. And there are obviously lots of great books out there. So I would say just start with one approach for a while and see how far it takes you before diving into another methodology, because I think that's where a lot of people get really hung up, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And not to sound like a broken record, but measure. Measure some more. We actually also have a video, how measurements make your sewing better.
Yeah, and you're in that video.
And I'm in that one.
Yeah, that's a really helpful video. I think learning how to take your measurements properly, and also not being scared of your measurements. I know a lot of people really don't enjoy the process of taking their own body measurements and feel a little bit of apprehension, especially if you feel like your body has changed over time. You don't really want to be fully aware of those changes, but that's what sewing is really all about, is getting comfortable with fitting clothes to your body versus vice versa. And so the more you can come at that with a certain amount of neutrality, the better your clothes are going to fit and the more happy you're going to be with what you make.
And this is where we channel Meg. It's just data.
It is. It's just numbers.
They're just numbers.
Yeah, it's true. And I agree. I think measurements are another really big factor in the fitting process. And then finally, this has come up many times today, muslins.
Muslins.
Yeah, muslins are really helpful. They're a really helpful tool. My personal approach to muslins, maybe you can tell us your approach to muslins in your own sewing practice. for me, I make muslins when I feel like the pattern warrants it. So if it's something that I've made before, if it's something that has a lot of ease and that I'm pretty sure is going to, doesn't have a lot of places where I really need it to fit super well, if it's something that is, maybe it's a knit and there's a certain amount of give due to the fabric, there are certain patterns where I know a muslin is not necessarily going to help me. But if it's going to be like a pair of pants, always make a muslin on a pair of pants. If it's something that is going to be really fitted or that I feel like is going to be fitted in an area of my body where I tend to have some issues getting things to fit, then those are the instances where I will definitely make a muslin and make sure that I'm getting it right. Because why waste the time to sew something if there's even a 50% chance that it's not going to be wearable or I'm not going to enjoy wearing it. Maybe it's wearable, but I don't enjoy wearing it. I don't feel good in it. So that's when I really choose to make a muslin and really, really take my time with fitting.
I want to add to that. If it's a design where there is an element, a feature that you won't be able to take in later. Mm-hmm. If it was a simple dress with side seams, you can always take the side seams in. But if it's something with a shirt collar or there's some element that you're sewing in there that you won't be able to fix later, if it doesn't fit, then definitely make a muslin before you dive into that. I would absolutely agree. Someone in the Pattern Maker panel also said when you're used to a certain company's fit as well, like you start to learn the adjustments that you need to make. I always need to shorten my armhole by like an inch and the torso, and then lengthen the legs and the arms. I have to lengthen the arms like 4 inches. So I study the measurements and I do those things, and then I make a muslin from that.
Yeah.
Swimsuits, definitely. I made a few this summer, and one of them I think I went to 3 muslins because I kept changing things and maybe not paying as much attention to what I was changing as I should have. I'm like, I'm going to do this fast. Fast didn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Robin and I both have short torsos. So we both have to make the same kinds of adjustments on certain patterns.
Yep, absolutely.
I feel like for me, it's, fit is one of those things that I think personally my perfectionist tendencies can run rampant. And I think a lot of people feel that way, where you just can get into a headspace where if the fit is not exactly the way you had it pictured in your head, then it's no good at all. And I think just coming to terms with the fact that, not that you don't want to strive to be great at fitting your garments, because that's a big part of why we sew, but I think understanding what a good fit is for you and what makes you feel comfortable and what makes you feel happy about what you're wearing versus, what somebody might say about a certain wrinkle on the internet or something like that. I think it's really important to put it in perspective for yourself and think about what works for you and for your body and for your own personal preferences when it comes to fit over anything else.
I never judge wrinkles on the internet. I just assume because
unless somebody asks you to.
Oh, right, yes. Unless somebody asks me to. But if you're making wearable muslins, you're wearing wearable muslins, and you might take a picture of it for Instagram. So it's like, how do I know what that garment is? Or maybe you got all the way through it, and there was a pucker, and it's just like, you know what? It's fine.
Yeah.
I absolutely never judge on those things.
I think another thing that I would recommend when it comes to fit that sometimes we overlook is just trying things on as you make them.
Yes.
So whether or not you make a muslin for something, one of the factors in fit, a big factor which we mentioned earlier, is fabric. And a lot of times you just don't know how something's going to perform. So for example, the Grace dress that I made, I did a YouTube video on it, and it's cut on the bias, and the fabric grew so much while I was making it, and I had to make all these adjustments. And if I'd done a little bit more fitting as I went, I think I could have avoided some of that. So just trying it on, a good time to do that is after you start assembling the bodice, maybe before you put in any facings or put in any linings. So you can still make adjustments at that point. There's a lot you can do before you finish your garment to make it really work for you.
That happened with my Nolan pants. My fabric had more mechanical stretch than I expected, and it kept growing around. And I had to keep taking it in, and I'm like, what's wrong with this pattern? I drafted it.
So of course nothing was wrong with it.
It was my fabric. It was literally my fabric.
Yeah, fabric makes such a huge difference. There's so much that can, I don't want to say go wrong, but so many variables.
So many variables
When it comes to fabric, and I think that's something we can overlook sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, the difference between ready-to-wear and home sewing is fabric is a big part of it. Mm-hmm. Well, that was our last question. Thank you guys for reading them for us today. We really appreciate that, and thanks to everybody who's here at the live taping today. So today we answered 7 of the most pressing sewing questions that you all have. So what's your big takeaway from today's episode?
Measure.
That's not your takeaway. That's your bring it. That's what you brought.
And I forget this constantly because the longer we do this, the easier it is to forget that you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes I take it for granted that everybody thinks like a pattern maker and isn't swapping sleeves on things. But these are good ideas. It makes sense that you'd want to put a gathered sleeve in something that's not gathered. So, what I think is the big takeaway for me is experimentation is the best. Failing is fine. Not judging is great. More experimentation. And it's all okay because it's fun. Sewing is fun.
Yeah, it is fun. I agree with that. I think for me, my big takeaway from what we talked about today, I think that I mentioned that I think a lot of sewists that I've met have kind of perfectionist tendencies, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think we tend to be very ambitious people, and we love to learn, and we love to try new things, and we love to see what we can do with our skills, and I think those are really admirable qualities. And that is kind of the other side of perfectionism, isn't it? It's sort of, that's the cost of being ambitious, is that sometimes you're not always happy with what you've made. And so I think if we can kind of make a little bit more peace with that, and that sometimes we're going to get frustrated, but that's because we're trying things. And if we weren't trying things, then I don't think, personality-wise, for the people that I know in the sewing world, I don't think we'd be very happy. I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and I was asking him, so there's another person who owns a business, and I asked him, do you think that you would be a happier person if you were less ambitious? And we thought about it, and I think it doesn't matter what the answer is. He said something like, well, yeah, but maybe I'd be a happier person if I had like a really low IQ or something too. But I don't know that's really like the answer. And I think it doesn't really matter because I am who I am, and you guys are who you are. And we do what is going to be fulfilling to us. And I think that perfectionism might be part of that, part of your makeup, if you're like me. And it's just kind of the other side of the coin to doing cool stuff that you want to do and being creative. So that's my long-winded answer, is that I think perfectionism is not all that bad.
No. It's all a growing experience and learning. I think most people get bored when they're not growing and learning.
I think that's true. Yeah. And I think that's something that, I think it's something that sewists have realized, is that life is more exciting when you're learning, even if that means a certain amount of failure.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people with creative hobbies probably feel that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my big takeaway, and it was really, really fun to do this live event with you all, our first ever live recording. Really, really a great time, and I'm so happy to see all of you here. If you're listening and you're not a Seamwork member, we are lucky to have some of the nicest and most helpful sewists that you can imagine in our private community, and our team, along with thousands of Seamworkers, are here to talk to you and cheer you on at any time. You can ask any question about sewing with absolutely no judgment on Seamwork, and you'll get some amazing answers. And you can also share your finished projects, and you can create goals, and we'll even email you reminders to keep you on track. So it's the perfect place to go if you need a quick boost of creative energy. And if you're not already a member, you can find us at seamwork.com/go/podcast50, and that gets you a 50% off a lifetime discount for Seamwork for being a podcast listener. So thank you again to everybody who's here today. And if you like this episode, you can leave us a review. We always appreciate those reviews. Haley and I read them every week, and we love getting a review, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you happen to listen to this podcast. You can also follow us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. You can follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And again, if you'd like to join Seamwork and become part of our private community, plus get access to hundreds of sewing patterns and dozens of sew-along classes, our podcast listeners get 50% off when you join at seamwork.com/go/podcast50. And that's it for us this week. Thank you, everybody. I'm Sarai.
And I'm Robin.
And this is Seamwork Radio.
Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. Podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork, or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.